Welcome to the Creative Mystic, where strong women wield magic and ancient wisdom. Chapter 5. Are we finished yet? Of an author's tale. Last video, we talked about some of the challenges, the vulnerabilities, the fears that have to be overcome in the writing process. And we ended on the carrot of having a publisher do all the work. Now, up to this point, I had worked with two different editors on this book, and I thought it was pretty well ready. But you know how that is. Every version is the final version until you find something else. And so when I signed on with this publisher, she was supposed to have her editor review the book, do the layout, and do the cover and actually publish it, and then do distribution and some marketing. And I thought, oh, this is great. So this is a hybrid publishing where, I pay upfront for a package deal to have all these things done. I figured since I had done so much work with the editors before I submitted it to them, that there shouldn't be much work to do. But for us impatient fire types, everything takes way too long. And so I had already been working on the book for probably about a year and a half. And so I was really champing at the bit to get this out because I wanted it out. And in the meantime, while I was working on the book, I started working on the handbook and some exercises to help a person who is interested develop some of these same skills that Ilara had, and kind of like the things she had to learn to become the healer that she was. So I was kind of working on two things at the same time, multitasking. So the publishing process was painfully slow, but it finally came through and it finally happened. It took a few months, and finally, in um, I think it was June of 2021 or July, the book finally came out. So this was the original version. So in making the covers, they asked me, well, what kind of covers do you like? And so I had gone through the top 100 of the Amazon bestsellers in the fantasy genre. And I picked out a few, they were kind of, what I wanted was like more of a single image and then have the background be sort of muted. So, but that somehow didn't translate to the artist, the company that was doing the artwork. And so when I got this cover back, it's nice, it's colorful, but there was something missing and I couldn't put my finger on it. So I said, fine, let's go with it. And so we published, and I was so excited. And but then after a few months, I wasn't seeing any response. I wasn't seeing any royalties to speak of. And so I asked, and they said, well, this book is hard to market because it doesn't fit into the genre. And I said, what do you mean by that? Because I had looked up all the tropes that are supposed to be in fantasy, like magic and some sort of a challenge between good and evil and an alternate world and uh, some sort of a quest or a challenge or a problem that has to be solved. And a hero or heroine who doesn't know that they have a particular special talent that they need to use to solve this problem. So those are some of the general tropes. Well, the thing is, this wasn't a plain old sword and sorcery uh, fantasy like a lot of the shows you see on TV where, you've got a quest and you got the bad guys and you've got somebody who can wield some magic and you go off and you do this and you have lots of fighting and lots of fighting. Well, what the biggest comment that the beta readers said about this book was that, first of all, the main character was a healer. And usually, I guess that must not be traditionally what a fantasy story has. And then the next thing was that there wasn't a lot of fighting because she tried to find peaceful solutions. She had made a vow not to do any harm, which that was a challenge for her. But still, the goddess-born people were peaceful people, and they did not go out stirring up trouble. They fought if they had to, but they were not there to cause trouble or make trouble or initiate trouble. So these were two challenging themes, and then the other thing was that there was I included a lot of mystical spiritual practices in the story. It was part of who she was. She used herbs. She used sound healing modalities. She used energy healing modalities. She was a channel of the divine energy, and she was able to channel it to another person to heal them. She was a healer. And then she was also very intuitive, very empathic. And instead of these just being attributes of a person that was going off and doing all sorts of things, this was what the story was about really focused on her using these abilities to do what she had to do. And so they didn't know how to market it. And they said, well, this isn't working. So we talked and we negotiated and I got the rights back. And I had written under a pen name at the suggestion of several people, but I had so many things going on at that time that how do you have a website for one name and a website for another name and manage all these things? It's just too much. I wanted to simplify. And so I got my rights back and I got the book back, and actually I got the cover art. I got the file, the original file that the people who had created the cover had used, and which I'll tell you about in another video when I get to making the covers. But so I sent this off to this really expensive editor because I'd gotten a couple of reviews that said, this story is very good, but it takes you about 25% of the book to get into it before the story takes off. And so they didn't give me a really good review. And some other reviewer said that, what did I do? Start off in the middle of things? And so I realized, okay, I got a problem with this book. I don't know what the problem is, but I have a problem. And so I sent it off to this expensive editor, and she was way too expensive to do the whole book. So I just had her review the book and edit maybe a couple of chapters and then give me a critique about it. So the first thing she said was, of course, there's the golden rule for writing is show, don't tell. And that's a tough one because, see, here I am. I'm telling you my story. I'm not showing it to you. And we tend to when we tell a story, we tend to tell the story. We don't act it out. But in writing, you have to act it out. You have to describe what the characters are doing and the steps and how they feel. And so the other thing she said was, your characters the reader needs to know, what are your characters thinking? Why are they doing what they're doing? And how do they feel when they do something? And now there's a new situation. How do they feel? And what does that bring up in them? And what are they going to do next? So it was this, she called it interiority, which was an interesting term. But basically, it is like for the reader to get into the head of the character. So I rewrote everything again, trying to do this. And actually, I found two more editors. And it's kind of nice to have different editors reviewing the same work, sort of like beta readers, but editors get a little deeper into it. It's not the cheapest option, but but I was at a place right here where I didn't know what my problem was. I didn't know what I needed, and I needed some guidance. And so I send off to these different editors, and they all have their opinions. And they all think you should make the story go this way or make the story go that way. And so I picked the best of each one of them and kind of combined it in. And so I wrote it up a new version again. Took out the slow stuff and the stuff that bogged the story down and the prologue that I had, which was kind of giving the history of how this whole thing came about. And I moved that over into another book. And so then, in the meantime, I was taking a lot of other writing classes. I joined this women's in publishing group, and we had a fantasy author group, and I was taking a lot of classes and learning about how to do plots. One of the best ones was with a lady, the expensive um, editor, recommended I read a book called Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and that's all about plot, staging your plot, how you do the action and the elements of the action. And so that was really helpful. And the biggest thing is like within the first few pages of the book, there has to be an inciting incident. In other words, something bad has to happen, or maybe it's good, but something has to happen to make the heroine, the main character, who is very happy in their life and they don't want to change, but something has to happen to make them have to change. And then the rest of the story is about how they deal with it. Their ups and all the mistaken beliefs that they have. It's like, well, I can just fix this and it'll be real easy. And it's like, maybe it's not quite so easy. So that's so I started learning how to create a story, a captivating story. So between working with the editors and doing all the studying and the research and listening to classes and and webinars and all these things, I began to realize that, my book was 130 some odd thousand words. And the trend was to have books being a little closer to about 60,000 words. And so I started looking at my book and I started looking at it and it's like, well, I could split it. I could split it where right after she has her adventure with the Grabandia Council, and then make the next book where she goes off and has to figure out a new way to solve the problem. And so I did that. And so eventually, with more editors, back and forth, I came up with two books. I had to rearrange the original book because I had it go through all the way to this big battle at the end. But I took it and rearranged it. And so it splits off at a point where there is a story in the first book, and then there is another story in the second book. And then each one of the next books will continue to have stories, segments of challenges that she has to work through. And I've actually drafted out the next 5 books, outlined them, I should say. And I got bits and pieces that I took out of these books and I'm going to put them over there. So the bottom line is I finally got my two manuscripts put together. Now it came to, there was more steps. Was I going to hire someone to do a cover and the layout, or was I going to do it myself? Can you guess what I did? We'll talk about that in the next video.